All right, so how about a vegetarian, especially a vegan? If the best sources of protein or the most efficient sources of protein come from animal sources, is it possible for a vegan to get enough protein? Yeah. Can you imagine how difficult that is without getting too many calories? That's a big challenge. And a classic vegetarian meal is kidney beans and rice. That actually sounds pretty good. But kidney beans and rice. So you've got, do you think of rice as a protein source? I don't. You think of it as a source of what? Carbohydrates, specifically a starch form of carbohydrates. And do you think of beans as a source of protein? Good, you should. What's it also a source of? Fiber. Fiber we derive no calories from. What else? Carbohydrates. Now I'm generalizing, but legumes in general, beans in general, for every gram of protein there's a gram of carbohydrate. Now obviously that's a big generalization because there's so many forms of beans or legumes. But, so you got a carb source and a carb source to get a complete protein. Can you see how hard it is for a vegan especially to get sufficient essential amino acids, sufficient protein without over consuming calories? It absolutely can be done. Very, very few vegetarians do it well. All right, is anybody in here vegetarian? No, okay. Then it's really...
I'm just saying don't be a vegetarian.
No, not at all. Not at all. I actually... yeah, I have a moment. I'm actually fairly supportive of a vegetarian diet, sort of. In America, one of the reasons why we eat so many calories is we make the meat portion of our dish the main part of the dish. Well, that's the part that bears the most calories, perhaps with the exception of fat, depending on how much. But you know, how many people put 2 sticks of butter on their plate? But a lot of people will put a 16-ounce steak on their plate and all the fat that comes with that. Really, if you're thinking about your dinner plate, don't think of the outer ring, think of the inner ring. That's your dinner plate. The outer part's there for looks and splash guard. All right? Think of the inner ring. And about half of that plate should be covered with vegetation. And I'm not talking about corn or beets or potatoes. I'm talking about high fiber, low calorie foods, salads, and well, you can imagine, I'm not gonna, there, like that. Well, maybe not so much the carrots, but stuff like this. That's half the plate. Then if you take the other half and you divide it into thirds, one of those thirds should be your meat portion if you're a meat eater. It should look like a side dish. We overconsume, there's the portion thing, we overconsume calories from protein. So actually I'm fairly supportive of a vegetarian diet. What I'm saying is it's difficult to do, and that what this slide would have shown is with the essential amino acids versus non-essentials, why. So on one side you would have seen a comparison of whey protein and egg albumin, the egg white, versus soy protein, which is the most popular source of protein from vegetable source. And for every gram of whey protein, it takes 4 grams of soy protein to get the same amount of usefulness. So that's 4 times the calories to get the same amount of use. And all that really cool stuff that we heard about soy and health for the longest time, turns out it wasn't soy protein and it wasn't soybeans. It was, if you really actually looked at the studies were not well done nutritional studies, they were sociological studies. And we had all this nutrition information derived from something that didn't actually analyze diet. If you really look at it, the reason why so many native Asian societies are thin is because they move. We don't move much. Most of those folks move an awful lot. It's not so much their diet as it is their movement. I mean, when was the last time you had a low-fat Chinese meal? Almost everything in real Chinese food is wok fried. Well, obviously we eat a little too much with a little too much fat here. It's hard to find truly authentic Chinese food here, but you can do it. All right, so how much protein should you get? This is a cool slide, but this is really the only part of the picture I really want you to look at. Most of you are trying to make a change in your body. So your body's in an adaptation phase. You're deliberately putting your body into a place where it has to change. Well, all of the research supports that about 1.2 to 1.8 grams, you don't have to calculate this by the way, but this is where it is. About 1.2 to 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Somewhere in this range is sufficient. Now, this is assuming that you're supplying your body with enough energy from carbs and fats. If you don't provide it with enough energy from carbs and fats, the body has to get that energy from protein. Energy is the body's first responsibility. It's its first priority, because without sufficient glucose for your brain, that's the end of the game. That's always its first responsibility. So this is enough protein. So what does that really mean in your life? It means this. Somewhere between 10% and 30% of your total caloric intake from protein is sufficient. For most of us, that's going to be right about 20 to 25% is going to keep you satisfied, keep your energy high, your cravings under control. Did you catch that? Energy high, cravings under control, right? While still supplying sufficient nutrition. Right? So I know this says 15 to 25%, but really my experience, now this is a Bryceism. My experience has been most people right around 20-25% is a really good range. That actually is something I would have you calculate if you're not having me or someone else design a menu for you where it is calculated. Right around 20 to 25% is really a good place to be, especially if the majority of those protein sources are from animal sources. Now, there are exceptions to this as well, and I only bring this up because it always ends up being a question at the end anyway. Sometimes, yeah, I will recommend outside that. Sometimes a physician will as well. Say cosmetic athletes, like a bodybuilder in pre-contest stage. You're taking this guy or this lady who's already ridiculously lean, usually somewhere 6 to hopefully more like 21 weeks out from their contest, and trying to take them to near death, seriously. In a professional bodybuilding contest, the person who's closest to death is the one most likely to win. And we put them on the cover of a magazine and sell it as health. I'll step off that soapbox now. That person's already really lean, and they're already exercising their hearts out. And so we're trying to get them even leaner, trying to get them down literally to that 1.5–2.5% body fat for the guys. The number is a little higher, but it looks a little bit lower on women. Well, I can only cut calories so far in general. And at some point, I can only cut protein so far before I'm not giving him enough bricks to rebuild that wall. Well, he's trying to show off that wall on stage, right? The guy worked really hard for that muscle that he's trying to show off. I don't want him to lose any more muscle than is absolutely necessary. And I can only cut calories from fat so far before he runs into an essential fatty acid deficit. All kinds of things go wrong. Hair starts falling out. Hormones are all over the board. Ladies, this happens a lot faster in you than it does in guys because you have more fat-dependent hormones than males do. There's all kinds of stuff that goes wrong fairly quickly. I can only cut protein and fat so far. So sometimes for that late stage contest diet, I have to cut out carbohydrates. Not completely, but mostly. It doesn't mean it's healthy. That's what we have to do for their chosen sport. Now, have any of you know any bodybuilders? Maybe some of you? No? Good, your life's better off. I say this having been, I used to be one of these guys. Drug-free, which is why I'm not anymore. I just didn't go that far. Yeah, we're pretty cranky. I get cranky enough without the sport of bodybuilding, but when you're trying to get that lean, you might die. Certain doctors' recommendations also, especially somebody who is right in the throes of diabetes, we might recommend for a temporary period of time a relatively low carbohydrate diet. It's to increase insulin sensitivity. If you want to know more about that, I'll be happy to discuss it, but it really is beyond the scope of this class. Okay, so anybody following a high protein diet? No? Okay. There are some possible negative consequences to following such a diet for the long term. For the long term, I stress that. But chances are most people are never going to follow one so strictly as to cause any of these things. But it's still not a very grand idea. You can live in a way with a different diet where you feel better for a longer period of time with less cravings.